friends, on behalf of Beyond Law CLC and Symbiosis Law School Pune, in our endeavor to bring different issues which are burning and relevant, we, in collaboration with Symbiosis Law School, thought that we should have a series of webinars on vulnerability and on different aspects. Today, we decided that we should have a talk on mental law and disability law. Mental health law and disability law is a quite relevant topic, keeping in view the incident which has happened recently, along with the fact that how the law has developed in the field of mental health law and disability law has a journey which, on the first brush, it appears that a lot has been done. But it is a field where there has to be a churning, and with that churning process, there will be learning. And churning by way of discussions through webinars, seminars, and even through print and electronic media when there is a dissemination of knowledge. At what are the gray areas or what are the black areas which have not been covered, or where we can move forward, is a line of thought process which helps us to think and move forward. Amongst the major acts that cover the disability laws are the Persons with Disability, that is PWD, Equal Opportunity and Protection Law of Act 1995, which ultimately developed and became the Rights of Persons with Disability Act 2016. And there was Mental Health Law of 1987, now eventually the Mental Health Act 2017. These are two domains which, if one starts speaking, can take the entire day as such, but still there would be areas which will continue. But once you have an expert, we are fortunate enough that we had Dr. Harish Shetty, as they say, back-to-back. This is his third session on the platform of Beyond Law CLC, and we have amongst us Professor Shashikala Gurupur, who is also the director of Symbiosis Law School. She's coming on this platform twice. They have immense knowledge, like we discussed yesterday. Once we have speakers of immense knowledge, then they give you the entire gamut of discussion, which invariably takes days in a capsule. And as we say that we have all seen the effect of a capsule or a medicine, immediately it starts reacting. So if a 15 minutes talk, 10 minutes talk, though it looks on the first brush, it's a bird eye view, but one gets that pleasure that he has got enriched in different dimensions. As they say that a movie has a 2D view, 3D view, now we are all having different 5D views also. So once there is a knowledge disseminated by the experts like Samindara Sawant, Vishwesh, I'm quite sacrosanct by the end of the day when the webinar is over, we will be all, even the speakers will have different dimensions, which they say nobody is perfect. Amongst us, I will just give a brief introduction, then I will ask them to speak for themselves, because they are large participants who would not have joined us earlier. Amongst us, we have Professor Shashikala Gurupur, who is a recipient of Full Rights Fellowship and is named amongst the 100 legal luminaries by LexisNexis 2016, and is also a member of 19th Law Commission of India, which itself shows the immense knowledge which is being acknowledged pan-India. And we are too glad that she has joined us, and more so when she's the Symbiosis Law School has collaborated in our endeavor that the nation, especially during this lockdown time, gets the knowledge in the right direction. Then we have amongst us Dr. Harish Shetty. We have already seen he has come twice on this platform. I would be candid enough. I've read about him, but as they say, hearing straight gives you a different knowledge. The effect of that, as we always say, that reading and hearing visually has its own impact. His successful attempt to abolish segregation, practice in schools separating children by virtue of marks, etc., and his collaboration with Maharashtra Human Rights Commission are landmarks in itself. During this lockdown, it is an interesting aspect or facet, we can say, that he also took a webinar on the judicial officers during this COVID-19, and I will ask him thereafter to give the insights, what was his role in that. Then amongst us, we have Dr. Vishwesh, who is a practicing lawyer, who is a PhD research scholar, and is also in the faculty of Law Symbiosis International, University Pune. He has been practicing in Karnataka High Court and Supreme Court. He has been on legal panels discussing various aspects. Then amongst us, we have Ms. Samindara Sawant, who specializes in psychodiagnostic and clinical assessment, has had considerable experience in child, adolescent, marriage, as well as family psychotherapy. She has an extensive experience in conducting workshops. As I said yesterday, once you have speakers of immense knowledge, the common thread which runs between them, like in common judgments, we invariably in law write that the common thread running between the various judgments is that this is the common point. So once we have 4 speakers, the common point running amongst them is they are all good speakers, having immense knowledge, and they are good enough to plant a sapling which can only grow into the trees of knowledge. And again, on behalf of Beyond Law CLC and Symbiosis Law School, with whom we have collaborated, I welcome you all. I would request Professor Shashikala Gurupur to slightly introduce the subject, and then we will start the webinar. Thank you, ma'am. Over to you.
Thank you, Vikas. It's such a pleasure to collaborate with you. For us now, Beyond CLC has become a knowledge partner for Symbiosis Law School Pune. We have had knowledge partners across the world and across India in the form of judicial academies, the associations, corporates, as much as research bodies. So it's a pleasure, because after yesterday's discussion on this series that we are jointly organizing on the vulnerable and the rights, we have had yesterday's discussion panning out on domestic violence and prevention of workplace harassment, where we brought in the mental health dimension of violence or any form of harassment, and it was very widely discussed. One of the points which I mentioned yesterday was who is the vulnerable. For the benefit of those who are newly joining the panel and those who are among the audience, I would like to quickly introduce this idea of the vulnerable, which developed in the scholarly works of scholars, especially feminist scholars like Martha Feynman, and the practice of European Court of Human Rights, where the word vulnerable means a gaping or open wound, and the vulnerable is the one who is undergoing suffering or pain. So the vulnerability is not necessarily restricted or equivalent to what we call in Indian legal context as the disadvantaged section or the marginalized section, because vulnerability is a dynamic concept. I always tell my students that if you look at the history, there have been times when powerful people have been behind the prison because they were political dissidents. I must tell you that vulnerability is not just about socioeconomic issue, because yesterday we were discussing gender and we were discussing the context of domestic violence, a trusted context where somebody can become vulnerable because they are psychologically, emotionally not able to think or not able to operate. So this kind of inability to relate to the world because of some kind of stress or pressure is very much the domain of mental health science or mental health care. So vulnerability is particularly relevant in case of children, in case of socially disadvantaged like women, or it could also be the minority and the marginalized, the racial minority, linguistic minority, geographically migrating population. So we couldn't find another context than this post-COVID context or COVID context, where the stress has caused the situation, unique situation of lockdown or unlock in the early stages has caused some kind of vulnerability in an unprecedented way. So all of us have become confused. We have been thrown into a kind of uncertainty which was never before even dreamt in last 50 years of our post-constitutional life. So who else other than the law fraternity could steer this kind of a new thought process of critically examining and also bringing in perspectives from the latest developments all over the world in the area of mental health law and the rights in the context of any aberration or endangering of mental health. I must tell you that vulnerability is particularly there in case of the infirm. In case of infirm, we include physically infirm like the frail old people, people who are physically incapacitated due to accident or some kind of degenerating nervous disease or some kind of congenital reason. Or we could also include those who are not able to make sense of the world because of the mentally infirm nature, which would qualify as impairment in terms of making decisions, impairment in terms of making sense of the world. So we thought we will have a panel where we will connect mental health and disability. Disability as a broad term in terms of being different from the dominant, being in a receiving end of the system because they are not in the forefront or they are not in the center stage of the system. So we thought that our scholar Vishwesh, who has been in the lobbying bodies advisory to the governments, and he has been in discussions with the United Nations, but who is particularly focused on physical disability and related challenges and the law. Whereas Dr. Shetty, I know, has personally fought a case in the court on dyslexia, which is a kind of impairment in terms of intellectual abilities. So these are the kinds of nuances and issues which our country needs to focus. I'll tell you why. And there is no other context than now, because now is the danger when people are being fired because they are not as smart as X or they are not as well performing as Y. And as a system, we seem to forget our moral responsibility and legal compliance. First of all, when we appoint people, we have a reservation right now for the so-called physically specially able. They call them as PH category, physically handicapped. I wouldn't like to use that word, but physically specially able. And how is this definition done? How does law define this? And how does the latest act, which Vikas mentioned, define this? And what do we see in reality? And what is the real demography of these people? And how is it articulated in the law? And when we are implementing it, how a kind of dominant definition is being used. That is Vishwesh's domain. I have been monitoring his PhD thesis, so Vishwesh will highlight more, especially when he has done his doctoral thesis in Pavagad area in Karnataka, with the empirical data from there, aside from the doctrinal study of the entire gamut of the law across the world and in India in relation to the reasonable accommodation and access to the physically challenged. On the other hand, we have the issues of mental health, where the whole law, how it evolved, has been very, very interesting in the colonial period. And in the post-constitutional era, we took almost 40 years to realize that this legislation was in the sort of a very, very exploitative, very one-sided, very utilitarian kind of legislation where the colonial masters did not want to serve the interest of these, but they wanted to protect the rest of the society from these people. So the wording of the act also, if you look at the legislation, the Unity Act, I mean, what kind of name is that, you know? And the very vocabulary which is used in the act, as if they are the people who are dangerous objects in the society, not subjects who are able to, who are endowed with the emotional ability and other abilities. Maybe their reasoning abilities, I don't say less, but relatively different from rest of the society. So inherently discriminatory situations cause suffering, they cause pain, and that is the concern of the idea of law in context of the vulnerable. So today's second leaf in this series is going to highlight on the idea of disability and mental health. So is it mental health in the context of disability? Yes. Is it mental health per se causing disability? Yes. Is it disability in terms of vulnerability as susceptibility to suffering, pain, and exclusion because of being different mentally? Is it the concern? Yes, we are covering all these concerns, and we expect our resource persons to enlighten the audience as well as all of us from their experience and expertise perspective on these different dimensions. So let me take you through the quick journey of the regulations relating to mental health, because I'm not going to touch on the disability because Vishwesh is connecting, but connecting mental health to disability a little bit I will do, and I would request Dr. Shetty to come in with his experiential and expertise background. I would like to share with you a very interesting quotation from this scholar Rappaport, who said how the psychiatrist and the lawyer connect. For the psychiatrist, it is another house altogether in terms of disputes, because psychiatrist engages in diagnosis, in the welfare of the patient, and looks at the health goals in terms of understanding the disorder and the position. Whereas for the lawyer, it is about the competency of that patient, it is about the dangerousness of that patient, and it is about the diminished responsibility if that patient is confronting the law in terms of committing some crime, and it is about the welfare of the society. So the difference between the two of us, the psychiatrist and the lawyer, is something that is of interest. That's why we thought neither of us could do justice to the legal landscape if we spoke alone. Secondly, by virtue of psychiatric illness or among the range of mental health issues, people are not to be denied of right to vote. The unsoundness of mind has to be established if you are denying someone of the right to vote. It is the mental health which becomes relevant in terms of competence to contract. If somebody has entered into a contract being a person of unsound mind, as proven by evidences, by the certification by an expert, then that contract would become void ab initio. Competency to contract even comes in terms of mental soundness, in terms of mental capacity to foresee the consequences of the act in case of children. So in this case, a contract of the minor also becomes void ab initio. In case of marriage, the mental unsoundness has become the ground of divorce. There have been number of interpretations by the court in each of these contexts in different cases. In case of adoption, a person to adopt, a person who is going in for adoption should be of sound mind, and the person who is giving the child up in adoption also should be of sound mind. These days, through institutional intervention, we have many other kinds of check gates in order to protect the interest of those who are involved in these kinds of illegal relationships. We have the right to health as the sacrosanct right within the supreme right in the scheme of fundamental rights in the Constitution enshrined under Article 21. Both life and liberty are not to be interfered with unless it is according to the due process of law and the procedure established by law. So right to health as part of right to life has been enforced by our various judgments by the court, and in their commitment to articulate this right, they went beyond right to health as simply physical health, but to include mental health as well, so that the right to life becomes the right to meaningful life, right to complete life, and right to a dignified life. So finer facets of human civilization are to be experienced when you are looking at the mental health as part of the right to health, as some of the judges have cited. If I were to share with you the body of research on the contribution and the work of judiciary in this area, it is quite a big body of research. Here, courts have always articulated that whenever there is an expense to be borne in the case of so-called lunatic or person of unsound mind, it becomes the duty of the state to bear these expenses. But if you look at the legislative history, it's quite interesting that the name of the legislation itself indicates to you, and the way in which the management of the mentally ill was happening in the colonial era is by 1838 we had a legislation where they were talking about the lunatics, and then this legislation was in a way a little bit refined by 1928, and again they were talking about these people as dangerous people. So there was no demarcation of the mental asylum and the prison. The mental asylum was part of the prison. The demarcation occurred only later. But when the demarcation occurred also, we inherited the same system till we passed the 1987 legislation. And there were a number of public interest litigations under the very nose of the legislation, especially litigation by Sheila Varse and a few others. And there were review reports and guidelines. Even Professor Upendra Bakshi has filed a litigation in Uttar Pradesh on the treatment of the women within the protection homes, which are welfare homes, especially those women who were mentally different. And then they were, once the case was filed about the maladministration of this protection home, a number of these women were boarded into trains to be sent away. Women who were not able to know where they belong to, where to travel to, and how to converse with others because of their impairment. So again, the stay had to be brought and things had to be administered by the intervention of the court. So we've seen a situation of addressing the mentally ill people as lunatics, people of unsound mind, to the migration into the 1987 Act, which even fulfilled the sacred objective of removing such derogatory language in the legislation itself. So the Mental Health Act of 1987 defined the mentally ill. But the problem with the 1987 legislation was it did not have much of input from the experts, psychiatrists. So a lot of limitations of the 1987 Act saw even the emergence of some of the very inhuman narratives of what we saw in Erwadi in 2007, a mentally ill home, which was administered by a religious organization where they were chained and tied, and then there was an outbreak of fire which charred these patients to death. So that was suo motu taken cognizance by the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court issued guidelines. It said that there should be a nationwide survey, and then the case was taken up. So we have these number of litigators, social activists, public interest litigation shaping the landscape of a very progressive mental health law. So our current law, which was passed in 2017, is a law which is a very, very progressive legislation because it has incorporated a lot of psychiatrists' input. But we also have a criticism coming from psychiatrists. I would request Dr. Shetty to highlight these, that for them there are certain blind spots in the legislation disappointing them. So we would like to know from you what are those gaps, sir. In addition to that, I would like to bring before you, there are certain principles that WHO has highlighted in terms of mental health care. And some of these principles are access to the mental health, protection of confidentiality, protection of dignity, ensuring that there is a legal representative who is consulted when the decisions have to be taken, ensuring that there is a kind of healthcare which is least restrictive, ensuring that ECT or electroconvulsive therapy, which we call in common language as common parlance as shock therapy, to be administered only in necessary cases, ensuring that patients don't overstay. We have had cases under the nose of 1987 legislation, and also sadly in case of prisons which are under state governance, and in case of state administered hospitals, even the cured patients were still staying with the ill patients, which was dangerous to both. So these kinds of situations, and also the stress on the protection of the society from the mentally ill to the rights of the mentally ill as patients, which was beginning with the 1987 legislation, became more pronounced in the 2017 legislation. But I must tell you that some of these WHO principles, if you see, and if you look at the situation of India as of now, WHO has done an analysis whereby it shows that we are 67% compliant with the WHO guidelines. That means we still have 33% compliance to be done in terms of concordance with the law. One of the plus points is that in 2019, we passed another set of guidelines rather, which was a bill, which was a National Commission bill for the autistic, for the mentally retarded, because Mental Health Act 2017 excluded the retarded people. I mean, this is a very scientifically calibrated kind of definition of the mentally ill. which is looking at the mentally ill as those people. Very, very interesting definition has come in this legislation, who are having substantial disorder of thinking, mood, perception, orientation, and they are grossly impaired in terms of judgment, whose behavior and capacity to recognize reality or relate to the reality is affected, and those who are involved with substance abuse or alcohol abuse or drugs abuse. But it does not include those who have mental retardation, because earlier definitions had lunatic, mental retardation, etc., subsumed into one definition, and these kinds of behavioral disorders were not included in that. But the limitation in this definition is that bipolar disorder was reluctant to be included. So many a times the question that comes is whether treatment which is taken for psychiatry is received well in the society, whether mental health is received as a normal facet of health, something where treatment is required, whether insurance is governing these things. So from the practitioner's point of view, some of these questions would be very, very relevant questions. Another is that in case of treatment, the patient himself or herself has the option of suggesting making the choice of treatment, which is recognizing their dignity, their autonomy and right of choice in the form of advance directive. Means when they were in sound mind, if they were able to give some advance directive, or whenever they were in the spells of sound mind, in between lunacy, because we know that scientifically such spells could come, they could give such directive in collaboration with their carer, which could be the doctor or the next friend-in-law or the legal representative, and the confidentiality of these people. So in India, if you see, as I end my part of this part of discussion and give it over to Dr. Shetty, the last point I would like to highlight is that in this legislation, they have allowed Ayush professionals also to be assisting psychiatrists, and also the general practitioners to be trained in psychiatry so that they are able to refer for special reference these cases. So that way, the community care has been subsumed into the legislation, which was not done earlier. Because in India, the stigma against the mentally ill is a major barrier for availing the mental health care. And then taking now that Bollywood demagogues are coming out in the open about their battle with depression, etc., the younger generation, even if they don't have those symptoms, they want to say that I may be having mental health issues, so I would like to refer this. Some of them don't want to refer because they don't want to fall out of the peer group. Some of them have behavioral problems, but they don't have the awareness. So we have a situation where in India, if you do a review, India has been responsible for 17% of the suicides the world over. 70 million mental health patients are housed in India, and 80,000 suicides are being reported almost annually, whereas we have only 4,000 psychiatrists in the country, and the psychiatrist number is 0.9 to 1%, one for every 1,000, which 1%, which is I think much less than the GP or qualified medical practitioner statistics. So there is a need for investing huge national budget. There is a need for looking at this issue as a serious issue. I would like to share here that our concern for the mental health as part of the general health in Symbiosis is something that I would like to share as the last point before I hand over to Dr. Shetty. We had healthcare subsumed into student care when our Pro-Chancellor, Dr. Vidya, took over as the director of our healthcare center. That's how she began her stint in Symbiosis way back in 2005. And then now we have healthcare insurance, we have a gym as a part of our gym and other basic fitness courses as part of our curriculum for the law students. And we have introduced the Emotional Wellbeing Center 2 years ago. We still have Dr. Shetty coming as the distinguished faculty and assisting us and enlightening us in terms of first entrance being oriented to college life and professional life. But we have our Emotional Wellbeing Center being open to the students who would like to walk in, who would like to be anonymously assisted in online fashion, etc. So we take a lot of due care in subsuming mental health care as part of the healthcare. So I would hand over this to Dr. Shetty, and after Dr. Shetty, Samindara madam will come in to give further perspectives. Then I would take it back in order to respond to any other issue, and then connect it to the Disability Act. I would request Shetty sir to respond both the angles at some point. Thank you. Over to you, sir.
As always, ma'am, historical perspective, social perspective, and all that we heard from you. You left very little for me to share, but I will still share. Every mental health professional needs to know 7 acts. For me, mental health law is not mental health care act alone. 7 acts: Mental Health Care Act, Disability Act, Right to Education Act, Prevention of Child Sexual Offences Act, Juvenile Justice Act, NDPS Act, and the Act on Elder Abuse. So I do not know the exact terminology of the Elder Abuse Act. We should be aware of 7 acts, and that I think is very important. I'm going to highlight lacunae in mental health and disability. In the lockdown, a lady who had stopped her medication and living alone, no relatives, went out in the nude in her locality. The local police station was alerted by the residents of the building. They made a station diary, but they did not follow the norms of the Mental Health Care Act. They were not aware at all. Ideally, they have a responsibility of taking the person to a psychiatrist, checking her out, and seeing that she gets first aid care of mental health in a mental hospital or a psychiatric facility which is run by the government of the state at that point of time. And this is not an isolated incident. Let me tell you, as ma'am said, the global burden of disease, which was released 3 months before the COVID scenario began, said 1 out of 7 Indians are mentally ill. 20 crore Indians. 2019. The Nimans, who released their epidemiological study in 2016, said 1 out of 7 to 1 out of 8, and they said 15 crores. And ma'am said that 4,000 psychiatrists and equal number of. Now, Mental Health Care Act says that the psychologists have to be MPhil, otherwise they are not qualified psychologists. Where will you get the MPhil from? How many seats are there for MPhil? Are we trying to replicate a mental health module of the West? No, we should be looking at a hierarchical module where experts are required for very difficult cases. We need to have a module like in the field of medicine. If malaria can be treated by an Anganwadi it's neither philosophy. It is a science where skills can be given at different levels. Do we want to have PhD psychologists only? Do we want to have MD psychiatrists at all levels? No, we cannot. We cannot. If I still remember the chat which I had with a very senior health officer of the government of Maharashtra, and we had right now. There are enough people staying alone, caring for themselves, and if they stop their medications, they would really go haywire. There was one girl, one lady sister of a police inspector who worked in an insurance. She stopped medication, then she went berserk. I sent my psychiatric social worker there, and we tried hard to see to it that she comes back for treatment. The family deserted her completely, and one day she was found murdered in her house, mentally ill. The issue is that the Mental Health Care Act, it takes time for it to actually move, and we'll know after a year or two how it has actually been transacted. But awareness about the Mental Health Act is absolutely poor, and that's one of the most important issues. The second issue is disability, and I will like to raise learning disability as one of the most important issues where I have been actively fighting for a very long time. Now, for all those who don't know what it is, remember, all those who are above 50, you would have found your friends dropping out from school because they failed twice. Earlier, you failed twice, you're out of school. And then you found them doing much better than you and me because they were bright. They had learning disability which did not allow them to pass exams, but they became big businessmen, and they would say, "Mujhe likhna nahi aata hai, par mujhe business aata hai." All of them had learning disability. What is it? It's a disability, unfortunately called as a disability. It's an artifact of an imperfect educational system. Unidirectional. It only involves memory, question answer, large number of education systems. Now, I'm not speaking of Professor Shashikala's institute. They have a lot of continuous assessment. I'm talking about till 12th standard until normal graduation. So those children, approximately 5 to 10% of kids in India or all over the world have the same. Most of the kids who drop out is not because of violence and poverty, it's because of learning disability which has been ignored. Now, I'll give you some figures. Northeast India in 2000, that in the 10th standard, Northeast is the worst affected. There's nothing there. 63,098 kids appeared for the 10th standard. Earlier I mentioned the first figure was 12th standard. Only 5 were discovered to be suffering from learning disability. 0.02%. And the law has said, the new law, Disability Act, said we will give you 2 years to build systems. Only 2 years. My argument with the HRD ministry, my argument with a lot of ministry have fallen in deaf hands. I have taken an appointment with the Prime Minister. It could not happen because of COVID, but I'll go and meet him once. Now, issue is, you have laws, but you have ignorance also. Law and ignorance is a very big gap. I strongly urge all law schools, not only who teach higher degrees in law, but even the smaller degrees, to have at least 50% community-based legal awareness. We have enough and provide perspective, but the community cannot wait for the college. Communities cannot wait for all the studious luminaries who teach law. What is happening to the youth? Youth are not interested in these issues at all. Youth, they want to become corporate lawyers to make big money. So I would say, to really bridge the gap between law institutes, psychiatry, and the people, psychiatry should also have at least 40 to 50% of activities of mental health where they look at disabilities, not only LD, but all the disabilities. Now in this act, this new act of disability, thalassemia also is one of the disabilities. But I'll tell you, thalassemia minor, they have no problems at all. They do not really suffer from most of the symptoms. They only have a little anemia. And that is also crept into that. I encouraged a famous, one of my patients, Dikuna, who fought this case, famous case, Dikuna versus Shipping Corporation of India. He had hallucinations on a ship. He was thrown out of Shipping Corporation of India. Though the older Disability Act said that he should be absorbed, he should be treated, and he should be back in the job. It took 15 years for us to get a judgment from the High Court, which was positive. And the SCI, which is a public sector company, went to Supreme Court just to delay the entire process. And when they actually got, when the Supreme Court took it up, the Supreme Court just threw the application of SCI and held on to the High Court order. A lot of employees are thrown out of all sectors because they are mentally ill. Very few sectors have a mental health policy. The country does not have a mental health policy or a suicide protection policy, suicide prevention policy. So we have tons of laws, but the gap between understanding the law, efficient transaction of the law, and building bridges with all the stakeholders are areas which we should actually concentrate on. Prevention of child sexual abuse. In Maharashtra, they have a lot of DDs, the cop DDs who are really taking care of these children when they come to the police station. And this awareness is very high. The schools and colleges are reporting child sexual abuse. That is something which is really happening big time. Elder abuse is also a very silent torture or a silent trauma which very few people come. I have at least 5 families who have told me that their sons are beating them up, taking the money, and really creating havoc. And every time when these elderly people go to the police station, they first thing is they come and talk to the boy. They explain to the boy, please don't do this. I mean, this act has not been very popular. Awareness of this act is also very poor, and we need to do something where we'll bridge this entire gap. Now, when we look at other acts, the Right to Education Act has been amended, or is in the process of amendment. I'm not too sure. Well, the Right to Education Act was one act which could have changed the dynamics in a school. Unfortunately, the system did not hug the act. The teachers had the freedom to teach in a manner where they could reach every child. Exams were not a stress and a tension. And they then saw that children started failing and children refused to learn. They did not learn. And when children came up to 8th standard, their basic concepts were wrong. But unfortunately, the entire software of Chachani in Marathi, Ani Pariksha, is so deeply ingrained that 3 or 4 states went to the center and said, we can't have a no failure system. Schools came and told me that, what, Dr. Shetty, we can't beat the child, we can't fail the child. Then what we should do? I said, every teacher who cannot reach out to the last child to get 35% marks, there's something wrong in the space between the teacher and the child. We had 10 years an opportunity to actually build that space, but I think we failed that act very badly. And this no failure policy actually was a very big impetus to help mental health, help learning, and see to it that the children's rights are taken care of. Lastly, a large part of kindergarten schools and nursery schools are unregulated. Countries who have prospered have spent a lot of money on early child education, because formative years are very early. It's everybody said, Freud said up to 13, Osho said up to 6. Vedas also said that age is the formative age. And what do we see? Largely unregulated, exorbitant fees, poor salary to teachers, and exams. And in the COVID era, a lot of kindergarten schools have online classes. So I would say that we need to do 5 things in the next few years to help mental health, because mental health care act is only one part of the entire story. We need to educate people of the rights and about the laws. We need to build capacities in various systems. We cannot increase the number of psychiatrists unless the MCI gives increases the number of students ratio to the teacher. It will not happen. We have no psychologists unless they have new departments in different colleges which are approved. Unless they have a council like the Maharashtra Medical Council or the Medical Council of India for psychologists, it is going to be a difficult state. RCA is a default body to regulate psychologists. The Rehabilitation Council of India has become a default body. Without, if you don't have a number, you can't practice. I mean, it is absolutely irrelevant and absolutely makes no sense at all. So 5 things. Number 1 is we need a lot of colleges and more teachers and more students and more seats for psychiatry. We need more students, more seats for psychology and psychiatric social work. We need to bridge the gap between science and the people by having a stepladder pattern of health system where a healthcare worker can go and screen on SRQ, self-report questionnaire, which is validated in India, patient health questionnaire, which is validated, and find out and screen people who are mentally ill. 4th, which is extremely important, we need to have a suicide prevention policy, a mental health policy, and a mental health minister. More people die of mental illness. Though it's not 80,000. The last year was beyond 1 lakh. And ma'am, underreporting. The extent of underreporting in Bombay. If somebody falls from a building, it is said fall unless they find a suicide note. It's accidental fall. Okay, and that I think is extent. And the 5th is we need to train an army of mental health soldiers. We can't live with psychiatrists all the time. We can't live with psychologists. We need to train army of mental health soldiers who are able to identify high risk, who are able to do first aid counseling, who are able to take the high risk, access mental services. Accessing mental services skill. And number 4 is they're able to do simple advice, not simple advice. And the 5th is they're available in times of severe stress, severe emergency, and that is extremely important. Lastly, my dear friends, you'll be shocked to hear that in the NCRB data, latest data of 2017, UP, Bihar, Jammu and Kashmir, Nagaland and Manipur have the lowest percentage of suicide. People, when I shared this, people laughed at me. They said, "Hey, it is poor reporting." I said, "No, we can't just believe in poor reporting. We should say that probably there are certain family systems in UP and Bihar which provide some amount of support even when they are poor." We need to really study this. Why UP, Bihar, JNK, Nagaland, Manipur has the lowest number of suicide. And also opposite is, if there is more violence, is it true that there is less suicide? This is something we need to really explore. And I would not just say that it's bad reporting Bihar. When you talk about Bihar, you have a different sense and different energy flowing inside the body. You have disbelief, you have your mistrust. But I would still say that we need to explore exactly what's happening. And really, lastly, suicide has been a mandate of the male gender. More women suffer from depression, but more men die of suicide. But the picture is changing under 18. NCRB figures say that under 18, more girls die of suicide than boys. So we need to look whether there are other things happening. And at the end, let learning not be in the classroom all the time. Let us learn inside the community. With that, I stop. Thank you, Shashikala. And I'm waiting for Vishwesh and Samindara to really add and learn so that I become much richer in what I'm doing.
So only 2 issues before we ask Samindara. I will just ask, because large people will generally feel, since you are on the platform, is there any subtle difference between mental health and mental illness? Because invariably people find it interchangeable. Is there any subtle difference while we talk of mental health and then of mental illness? What is the subtle difference?
There is
And the
nothing.
seventh act which you were talking of is Maintenance and Welfare of Parent Senior Citizen Act 2007.
Yes. Well,
Yes.
there is no subtle difference. There is clear difference. If Harish Shetty is upset about something, but is able to put that behind and do his work, and is able to take care of his family, is able to speak to friends, is able to engage in meaningful vocation and leisure activities, it is mental health. Now, Amitabh Bachchan also asked me the same question on October 2 on Gandhi Jayanti Day on NDTV. But how do you diagnose mental illness, Dr. You tell me. Because he was not convinced, because he said you don't examine, you don't have investigations. I told him this, and that video is on the social media. But he was very curious to understand. And I would tell everybody who's listening, mental illness is not philosophy. It's not vague. It's not quantum physics, but it's close to mathematics. So you take a detailed history. Just like you have physical examination in a physical illness, you have a mental status examination. It's not philosophy. And just as you guys would do your blood tests and your X-rays, we have psychologists who do psychological tests. So it's a very established science. There's nothing vague about it, sir. Mental illness is clearly classified as disorders, and mental health is about yoga, about relaxation, about running, about laughing, and about being in the webinar, which improves mental health. So there is no subtle difference. That's very, very clear difference, and which is how it is. Thank you.
Thank you. Before we ask Samindara, but one fact is quite that gives a mental solace. That you said that Mr. Amitabh Bachchan also had certain doubts as to how it is to be there. So if Mr. Bachchan can have certain doubts about that, then for a common man, it is quite understandable. But since the session is engaging, and I'm seeing that the way you, Ma'am Shashikala and Dr. Shetty, you put it across, I was seeing Ma'am Samindara Sawant was totally engrossed. I was feeling that person who is successful, the reason behind it is that the student of learning, as long as it is existing within any person, even if he's a key speaker, shows that what I invariably say, that for a person to rise is between the ordinary and extraordinary, that extra effort to learn the nuances. And we had already the insights from the Disha team when Mugdha Bavre had given the insights, where Dr. Harish Shetty was already there. So without taking much time, I will ask Samindara Sawant to give the insights on this webinar. Ma'am, Samindara ma'am?
Yeah. Hello. No, I couldn't hear for a bit.
Yeah.
So thank you, Vikas ji, for bringing up this whole concept about mental health and mental illness, because that is where I would like to really start off with. I think nowadays the term mental health is a fairly well accepted and well used one, and all of us understand and realize the need or the importance of ensuring that we are prioritizing our mental health. Unfortunately, mental illness as a term or as a concept is not as well accepted. So, as Dr. Shetty just said, an important question to ask here is, how much do we really understand about mental health or mental illness? So, is feeling upset a mental illness, or is panicking during exams a mental illness? How do we differentiate between what are normal reactions to stressors and what comprises a mental health condition, so to speak? Just like health and illness fall on a spectrum, mental health and mental illness are also two ends of a spectrum. As we all know, health is defined as the absence of disease. Similarly, the same concept applies to mental health as well. Right? Many of us, or rather most of us, experience distress, emotional and mental disturbances or breakdowns on various occasions in life when we feel overwhelmed by certain situations. But the term mental illness specifically refers to those individuals who are so grappled by these problems that they are unable to deal with everyday life. To understand simply, it is a condition where a person's mood or thinking or behavior or a combination of these three are so seriously affected that it impacts their functioning either in their personal life or in academic life or in occupational life. Essentially, they are not able to lead a healthy daily, everyday life as any of us would. Again, what I would like here to bring out is two very, very real and seemingly contradictory points that came up when our earlier two speakers spoke. As Professor Shashikala very rightly said, our Mental Health Act, the most recent version of the Mental Health Act, is a fairly progressive act, wherein they have the government has tried to take into account what has been happening in the Western countries, take into account the guidelines given by WHO, and come up with a very comprehensive act. Yet, as Dr. Shetty has so rightly and aptly pointed out, what we see on the other hand is abysmal ignorance to a level that we can't even imagine. So how do we really bridge the gap between an act which is so progressive and ignorance which is rampant in our society? So what happens in India is mental illness is something that is really shrouded in a lot of mystery and silence. While we do have these rights and these acts to protect people with mental illness or people with disability for that matter, the fact remains that few people are fully aware of these rights, and not just people as in lay people or family members, but as we just heard about the example doctor gave us, even cops may not be fully aware, even other professionals may not be fully aware of what these rights are or what the acts mandate them as professionals or other fellow human beings to do in case of a person with a mental illness. So in a scenario where mental illness itself is not understood and is surrounded by stigma, protection of the rights of people suffering from it is something that definitely takes a backseat or takes a beating rather. So the tenets of the act and the ground realities are very, very different. A few things I would like to point out is, for example, our Mental Health Act of 2017 clarifies that every person with mental illness has the right to access treatment from various bodies, either government bodies or private bodies for that matter. The reality, in many, many cases, mental illness goes unidentified and undiagnosed, whether it is due to shame and stigma, whether it is due to superficial beliefs or superstitious beliefs, or simply ignorance. So when there is no identification, then there is no diagnosis. I mean, treatment looks very, very far ahead, right? Then we talk about the act talks about the right to live with dignity, and where the person with mental illness faces no discrimination. What we see as mental health professionals every day talking to our patients is there's discrimination happening at multiple levels. And here I would like to start with children. Now, many of the children that we see come not really under the Mental Health Act, but under the Rights of People with Disabilities Act, and as doctor said, the Right to Education Act. So children with disabilities, and these include learning disabilities, children suffering from ADHD, attention deficit disorder, various forms of the autism spectrum disorder, or any other neurodevelopmental disabilities, they are actually well protected by the law, both under the Rights of People with Disability Act as well as the RTE Act. Both these acts state that all children have a right not just to education, but to be included in the mainstream schools without any kind of discrimination and with full access to whatever support they may need. Yet the reality, my dear friends, is very, very different. Till date, the number of schools that open their gates and their hearts to children with disabilities are extremely few. Parents are not even aware of the fact that no school can deny admission to their child on the basis of disability, nor remove a child quoting either lack of resources or manpower to address the child's needs. Children have a right to timely assessments of their disability, which doesn't happen, unfortunately, until the child goes right up to grade 9 or 10, which is when the various provisions or concessions, as they are commonly known, are given to these children. So children go undiagnosed and unassessed, and we just heard Dr. speak about early intervention and the importance of catching the disability early on so that we can preserve the self-worth and self-esteem of the child, right? So what happens is, why schools, even parents often fail to accept that their child has disabilities, or we have so often even come across parents who after assessment have come to know there is a diagnosis in place that the child suffers, let's say, from a learning disability. But parents say, we don't believe in all this. We don't want to label our child. We don't want our child to suffer. So we don't want the child to get any help or support, which in fact the government or the education board is offering the child. So unfortunately, discrimination can start right there at home, where parents deny to provide these fundamental rights to children. Discrimination doesn't stop there. It continues to the school, where the schools fail to give this kind of support to the children. There are other peers. There are peers, friends, parents and relatives of friends who may, especially if children have behavioral difficulties, the friends and their friends are discouraged from interacting with them. They are told to stay away from children who may have issues or difficulties or any kind of obvious abnormal behaviors. So at every level, these children with disability experience and grow up with discrimination, and a lot of it is so subtle and so ingrained in our society that we don't even realize it to be discrimination. Again, if we go to the elders or the adults who have legitimate mental illnesses or various disorders that we spoke about, as Dr. Shetty already said, there is discrimination at workplace, either people. So people today, it is because it is politically correct to say that we are an inclusive organization. Many organizations, especially the multinational organizations, do have in their constitution or in their values and mission statement that they are an inclusive organization and they include people with disabilities or with mental illness. But the reality again could be very different in terms of the kind of work that's allotted to them, the kind of inclusion that happens in the day-to-day behavior with colleagues and with superiors. So there is a lot of subtle and gross discrimination that we need to, as professionals, look at how to identify and how to then move about alleviating these. So as what we have seen is, the first and foremost that we try to do is psychoeducation and awareness. These are probably the first thing we need to do as the way forward. We need to make our society at large more aware and more informed about mental illness, about disability, as well as about the constitutional position on the same. What do our rules, our laws and our acts say about the rights and responsibilities towards people with disabilities? The other important thing is advocacy. As parents, as relatives, as friends, if we know of anybody suffering from a mental illness or a disability, as professionals working in whichever domain that we are active in, we have to advocate for inclusion of all people. We have to advocate for empathy and understanding and for equal opportunities in every possible area. So this is the grassroots level at which we need to really start working. If we have to really look at how we can bridge this gap between what the act says is available, is accessible to the people, as well as what the ground reality is. So I think this is where I would like to stop and hand over back to all of you.
Ma'am, a slight wrap up, then we can ask Dr. Vishwesh, because he will take on a different tangent, though correlated with this entire issue. Thank you, ma'am. The way Mrs. Samindara Sawant has explained that there is a subtle difference also and there is a gross difference also. That the differences correlating between the subtle and gross itself shows that the entire thought process where there can be a vacuum. We all feel that we know everything, but again, as the common point which has boiled down is that yes, there is requirement of dissemination of knowledge and sensitization of knowledge. But how do we relate mental health with Disability Act? How the balance has to be maintained? What are the issues and challenges? I would request Dr. Vishwesh Shekhar. We have heard a lot about him, and when we all decided to go ahead with this collaborative session, ma'am was full gaga about you, and then we also slightly googled out, and then we found yes. And though we always say, when ma'am says that I am recommending this, or Dr. Shetty says I am recommending Samindara or Mugdha, they say that that is the entire credibility. And what we said in the common point, that we have to change our mindsets, and the mindsets slightly creep in. I'm just giving an example, though it's no correlation with the mental health, but the fact it's all seeps in our mind is that once we know that Dr. Shetty is recommending, the recommendation is good. So in the same way, while anybody starts, if we start promoting mental health, the intent and objective of the Mental Act 2017, in the right way, the thought process would continue to change, that we all believe that each one can have its own role. Over to you, Dr. Vishwesh.
Thank you. Good evening, all. I would start by going back to what Dr. Shetty said, he was talking about learning disability or dyslexia. Now, what the law states as far as the new RPD Act or the Mental Health Care Act, both the acts are concerned, is that both of them follow our signing the UNCRPD. The UNCRPD is a completely rights-based convention which has been grafted into both these statutes. Now, what is the main focus of the UNCRPD and what has come to these statutes is that people with disabilities shall have rights. And disability itself, the concept, is again borrowed from the convention, wherein disability is not mere lack of sight or lack of a particular sensory perception. It is a disability which is a long-term impediment when looked at from the point of view of interaction with certain aspects of society, aspects of life, and wherein barriers exist. And persons with disabilities are those who have certain conditions which do not help them overcome these barriers. So the relationship between barriers and how to overcome them to enjoy your rights is the determining factor of what disability is. Now, I would further continue to go back to Dr. Shetty's example where he said dyslexia. Dyslexia is, he says, is not a stricto sensu disability. Why did he say that? I started thinking. If you look at Dr. Shetty's example and any other disability, in a dyslexic person, the barrier is actually the education system. It is actually the school. It is not the individual himself or herself that is not capable of performing. It is the expectation of the system that has created a barrier. And this is where the disability comes in. Once the barrier is removed, or an equal opportunity by providing accommodation, reasonable accommodation or accessibility is provided to wipe out this barrier, then that person with a perceived disability is able to participate equally and achieve his rights and contribute to society and to the people around him or her. This is the crux of the matter. I think this is where the law has come in. And this is a very important thing that we have to bear in mind. This has also become a duty on us after the Supreme Court in Jija Ghosh's case said it is not the attitude of the person with disability, but it is the attitude of a person who is non-disabled and the collective attitude of society towards disability that has defeated the whole rights regime, the whole efforts of the entire movement to help disabled people achieve their rights. So if you ask me, I would very succinctly put it to state that when you look at disability, please look at it from the point of view of what is the barrier for the person with disability. How the law and how we can remove that barrier and enable participation at the achievement of rights. That is the purpose of law. And that is the purpose of every other citizen, to help removal of a barrier. The barrier might be a physical barrier, the barrier might be an attitudinal barrier, the barrier might come in several forms. But the removal of these barriers is where the law has come in, and the law alone is not sufficient. There has to be an attitudinal change to recognize these barriers and try to remove them and ensure equal participation of persons with disabilities, which is the aim of the UNCRPD, which is the aim of the statute. Till this happens, the statute will remain on paper and the problems of the persons with disabilities will continue unabated. This is my short take on the matter.
Shashi ma'am, since
Vishwesh, could you highlight on any case or a comparative position in other jurisdiction as far as these barriers are concerned?
Madam, I would first like to point out that as far as mental illness is concerned, the Mental Health Care Act is a statute that separates mental illness as a disability. Mental illness as a disability is still dealt with under the Rights of Persons with Disability Act. Mental health care is for a person with a mental illness who is more treated from the patient point of view, as a patient. And although both these statutes are rights-based and are flowing from the UNCRPD and our ratification of it, these two statutes are different in that sense. I am sure Dr. Shetty will agree with me there. Now, in other jurisdictions, if you look at the Americans with Disabilities Act or the Equality Act in the UK, there is no separate classification like this. If it is a disability, it comes as a disability under the Omnibus Disability Statute. That is one difference that we find in India and other jurisdictions.
So
And
what
again,
happens, yeah, please continue. Yeah.
And again, in our system, I think the law is more than sufficient if looked at it in isolation. But what is preventing the law from delivering is our own attitudes. The whole systemic attitude, be it the legal system, be it doctors, be it the disabled themselves, the attitude is the main barrier in the law delivering what it is supposed to deliver. Okay.
See, I want to enlighten, rather share with the House to enlighten all of us that the idea of disability being linked to the Mental Health Act is something that even WHO analysis pointed out. That the part of security, for example, the part of participation in gainful employment, for example, are rather served in the Disability Act than the Mental Health Act. So my argument and our concern when we started this vulnerability series was to drive home the point that you have to understand about the vulnerable and their entitlements under the law and the justice scheme, so that there is a determination and there is an openness to accommodate them, what Vishwesh argues as access and reasonable accommodation. You know why? What Dr. Shetty said and what Vishwesh highlighted, if you put together, about 12% of the population of this country are coming within that bracket, and they are either excluded or removed from the productive workforce. So can't we reasonably accommodate them and give them access in the productive workforce? For example, when we got in collaboration with an NGO, some visually, specially abled students to be trained in leadership and some of the skills at the weekend by our students, it changed our students' perspective because they could understand the challenges and the bravery of these children in overcoming those limitations and participating in mainstream life. So they took some initiative to go along with them to advocate for appointing them in, let us say, front desk or some canteens and things like that. So in our country, what is required is to understand that by excluding them, we are excluding a large chunk of the substantial chunk of the population from the production or productive workforce and denying them a life of participation and dignity and denying ourselves the opportunity to think broader, the opportunity to be flexible, the opportunity to develop. So it's not only our responsibility, it is also our privilege to learn by accommodating this category of people in our lives. So our main aim in driving the vulnerability theory and vulnerability rights is what Martha Feynman herself pointed out, is to the advantage of the others, that we have to know about the vulnerable and to accommodate them and to give access, because disability itself, I have undergone disability for 6 weeks because of some freak fall in snow. So anybody can go through that stage. Even mental illness, temporary stresses can cause mental illness. I would request Harish Shetty to confirm this point. So any of us can become vulnerable, because vulnerability can be a sudden phase, it can be a passing phase, or it may remain with you. So it's a responsibility of every citizen and it is a responsibility of the legal system. So I argue that in the constitution, special provision shall be made for women and children. I say women, children, and the vulnerable. So we will have a broader definition of the vulnerable to include the categories that we are discussing today. So this is my interjection, and I would request Vikas to take over further. Thank you, Vishwesh. And Dr. Shetty, if you would like to add any point in this regard.
I think you have said the most important thing, that the myth that some people will not fall ill at all, the strong mind myth, is so false. I mean, let's treat brain with the same respect as stomach and heart. We treat the stomach with respect. When something goes wrong, you rush. We treat the heart with respect, and we accept that things go wrong. So let us accept that mental illness is very common. 1 out of 8 said demands, and 1 out of 7 says global burden of disease. And these are very, very reputed, good studies. So the unfortunate part is, ma'am and Vishwesh and my friend Samindara and Vikas, across the COVID crisis, just an example of awareness, except for the Prime Minister on two occasions, no bureaucrat, no health minister of any state, no politician of any color has made any mention that COVID also causes a lot of mental health problems, like any disaster. So that shows the level of awareness. Second point is, on the World Mental Health Day, nobody tweets on the World Mental Health Day. When actor dies or when something happens, everybody is sad. Understandably, I was also sad, but nobody tweets on the World Mental Health. So the level of awareness in our subconscious in India, across policymakers, across intelligent people, across those who are influencers, is still very slow. We need a movement as big as Gandhiji's salt satyagraha. We need that sort of a movement to really change things. It's not in the hands of the psychiatrists and psychologists. We need a mass movement to help people understand that resilience building, yoga, identifying mental illness, and preventing suicide is as important as smallpox, malaria, polio, leprosy, and tuberculosis. Which is why we have been asking for a mental health commissioner in districts, a mental health minister in states, etc., etc. So focus on mental health has to improve. And unfortunately, madam, when somebody has an eye problem, you get philanthropists rushing to donate for eye camps. If anybody has cancer, we have enough philanthropists and others who are very touched and they donate. But when so many ministers' children, so many actors' children, and so many others have been treated for mental illness by me and others, we still have not been able to really tap their resource, not the financial resource, but the intellectual resource to change the paradigm in the country. That is our failure. I mean, I would say that it's partly my failure. But my teacher said very beautifully, he passed away, Professor Anand, he said, Harish, बहुत upset mat ho jao. Indian revolutions are slow, unlike the French guillotine. That's what he said, and I abide by that. Sorry, I spoke a little longer. I'm sorry.
No. As long as the insights are good, one always enjoys. There's a quite long question posted both for Shashikala ma'am and Vishwesh. It's a common question. Since I think that question will be taking time, Dr. Harish, I will ask you, since we are a lot talking that we have to do mental strengthness, though it's not correlated. Like in all these webinars, we asked a lot of people that what is your take, that how you've been able to summarize all these issues, how do you channelize all these questions in the right perspective. They said the common point which came out was that you have to do a lot of mental exercises also the same way as the body does, because the more amount of mental exercise you do, then the muscle powers of the brain also improves. That is one aspect. Meanwhile, as Shashi ma'am and Vishwesh, Dr. Vishwesh would be taking that question, and once they are ready. Meanwhile, what are your takes that how to overcome all this and sensitize the people in your ways? And I will also ask Samindara Sawant to give the insights, and that way, how do we sensitize? It's one issue is through media, electronic, social, WhatsApp, through NGOs. But another way, which especially during the COVID times, one could be the webinars. These effects, where are their rights and duties? Everybody talks of their rights, but nobody says what is the duty vis-a-vis the society at large, and especially these persons with disabilities or mental health issues, they as are invariably frowned upon. So what are your takes on, I'm asking from both of you.
Samindara will go first. I'll.
Okay.
So, what I have realized is that one of the best ways to sensitize is to use our youth. The young generation is full of full of they are in a space where they want to find ideals to advocate for and principles to fight for, and if we at the right juncture are able to bring in this awareness in the youth, they can galvanize a lot of change because they are so social media savvy, they are so technology savvy, they have such innovative and beautiful ways of connecting and creating a wave, so to speak. So I think sensitizing the youth, the term which Dr. Shetty often uses of creating mental health soldiers or mental health warriors. I think our youth is one such population that can be an amazing army for us to work with. So that is one thing. We've also, as professionals, often talked about initiating mental health education right from school, high school or middle school levels, where we sensitize children from that age about these issues, rather than suppressing, rather than hushing things up, hushing mental illness. Talk about it, make children aware. This is something we as parents, as families, can start doing in our own home. Start talking about these things. So for example, it's not only when a celebrity suicide takes place that we talk about it, but also use these opportunities to talk about mental illness, to talk about what could have possibly what could possibly be the reasons why people get to this point. Helps build awareness in children from an early age, because these are the ones who are going to grow up and become citizens of tomorrow. So building it early on in children and adolescents and in youth is one of the best ways to sensitize people towards the rights as well as the duties as society. The other thing, as Vikasji, you just rightly mentioned, with COVID, all of us have been hurtled into the virtual world. Some of us have willingly embraced it. Some of us have been quite resistant and hesitant, but have finally realized that there is no way without it. So we can use the virtual world to have awareness sessions like this, have webinars, have information sessions like this, wherein we could spread the word around. We could use other entertaining means. We have such a rich culture of media, of creative art forms. We could use street plays, we could use movies, we could use cartoons to bring about awareness at a societal level. So we have to bring the awareness to the grassroots level, rather than simply at an educational or at an intellectual level. It has to percolate down to each and every person of society for it to become a movement that will really help us to bridge that gap. These are a few, and these are small beginnings, but as we just heard, revolution at times in India may take time, but it's slow and steady, but it's surely taking place. So if we work at these small things, we can definitely go forward.
I would like to say that every professional in India has to meet India, which means pluralistic exposure to people is very important when you're graduating, when you're working. I made a mission, I made a promise to myself. I will meet more people than patients, which means that I will not sit in my clinic. I will expose myself to different groups. And I've also conducted a session on mental health for pickpockets 25 years ago. So first is multi-pronged exposure gives you the language of effectively transacting a message where there can be a eureka and a breakthrough. That is number one. Number two, I completely agree with Samindara that the youth are asking for leadership. They are not looking at politicians. They are looking for inspired men and women like Madam Shashikala, Vishwesh, in the institute and outside, who would guide them, and they are willing to put their neck on the yoke and work. And remember, when you guide them, it has to be democratic. It has to be open-ended, because they have a lot of ideas which you may never have thought about. That is the second most important point. And the third most important point is, just like Corona has oxygen, mental health is awareness, awareness. Keep knocking at doors. Sunil Gavaskar once told a young cricketer, which Vikas heard on that day, that keep knocking till the door falls, and don't get upset when people are angry at you. I still remember when I called the parents of a young girl in a college hostel who was suicidal, and she would not give me the numbers. Somehow I got the numbers. I called them. I picked them up myself from Dadar. I kept this girl in my home. My wife took care of her because she was alone. I brought I got the parents here. She turned around and said, "I don't have any suicidal ideation." There was an inquiry. Why did Harish Shetty call the parents? In mental health awareness, when you rock the boat, you will be unpopular for the next 20 years. But we are not mental health professionals. We are all in this era mental health missionaries. If we look at ourselves as mental health missionaries, we will accelerate the change much faster. And the last point is, let us meet India to learn India so that we can articulate in a manner that is effective for India. Learn as many languages, learn all the idioms of the different languages, and be effective. Social media is a multiplier, is a force multiplier.
Thank you, Mr. Harish and Samindara. The insights are quite good. Ishita, we can unmute you because that question probably ma'am and Vishwesh would have read it. If ma'am, you've examined that, and Vishwesh?
Yes, I have seen.
Vishwesh, what are your takes on that?
The purposes for which guardianship is sought for the person is to take care of finances. The finances and other property matters are governed by the Rights of Person, guardianship under the Rights of Persons with Disability Act, that is Section 14. That is first thing. And limited guardianship under RPDA is the only guardianship that provides for decisions to be taken by the guardian for purposes of property and finances. That is number 2. Number 3 is that limited guardianship under the RPDA Act overrides every other guardianship. Limited guardianship, once granted under the RPDA Act, is the only guardianship that is recognized by law. The section itself begins with notwithstanding clause, notwithstanding anything said in any other act. So limited guardianship under Section 14 is the only guardianship that seems to be recognized under law now. The most important thing here is to get a limited guardianship under Section 14. It depends on which state you are from and if the guardianship committee has been formed under the RPDA for your state under the rules of the Act. Please check about that, and you have to apply before that committee.
Dr. Vishwesh, we have unmuted her. She can tell what state she's
Right. So good evening, sir. Sir, I'm from Delhi, and the Delhi Rights of Persons with Disabilities rules has also been notified, which states that we can approach the district court where the person suffering from disability resides. Within the jurisdiction of that court, we can the place we can approach the court. But sir, with respect to this particular case, if the person herself is suffering from advanced senile dementia, will she be able to take a decision in consultation with the guardian, with her relative? That is my concern.
The first thing is the committee has to be convinced. That,
right, the court, right.
The court has to be, deciding authority has to be convinced. I don't think that is a major issue, but you have to apply under Section 14 only of the Act.
Okay, sir. Okay, thank you so much.
The operative provision for your purposes in case of finances, property, and other things.
Right.
Section 14 of the RPDA, not the other Act which you have put.
Okay, sir. Thank you so much.
Ishita ma'am, I suppose that your answer stands quite redressed by you. Do you still want the insights from Dr. Shashi? Professor Shashi?
I would love that. I would love that.
Yeah, because this Mental Health Act, a Mental Healthcare Act, which was there in 1987, as we already told, it was more society-centric. It was more about how to handle situations which are having the people suffering from these illnesses to be addressed. So Section 55 under that legislation looked at this issue of property management and things like that. Whereas the current legislation is more healthcare focused. It's more care focused and patient focused. So when it comes to these issues, the existing provisions and case-to-case basis, courts will decide with the expert opinion. and the expert opinion has to come from the psychiatrist, as we already know.
Right.
I have not read the preparatory phase of the legislation. Dr. Shetty, can you highlight why they have virtually done away with the provision on the property management and resource management in case of mental health care patients, because you were in the deliberations at some stage?
I am not, I would be very honest to admit that I'm not aware. I'll really look into it. But isn't there a trust act also? A lot of patients are forming trust with members of the family, younger members, and a lawyer to protect the interest of the mentally ill much later. And also when it comes to mental health, the will when they execute, I do not see any provisions in the mental health act. But I'll come back, I'll check and come back, and I would let.
No, she's pointing out that lacuna itself, that regarding the property and finances, the provisions which were there in the 1987 Act
are missing.
Yeah, these are some of the criticisms, and she has just hit that limitation of this Act. That's why it's only 67% complying with the WHO guidelines.
So I will check on that, ma'am, and I'll definitely come back. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
I will. I would need to go at 6:45, sir, if you don't mind.
Sir. It's a good take by you that it also gives us the ring bells. Fortunately or unfortunately, we don't have much questions, but like we usually do, that we can have a wrap up. What is your take? The point by you that you took the action of 25 years ago, sensitizing the pickpockets, but at the same time, Samindara speaking that we should not only each become a worker in the right sense of the society to disseminate knowledge. So that I will say it is not pickpocket, but at least we can create different pockets within the society by disseminating knowledge where people can actually spread the knowledge. Ultimately, we will ask Shashikala ma'am to conclude, but before that, I will ask Dr. Shetty, what do you think after this? What is the way forward? And what are your take then from Samindara, then Vishwesh and
I agree with
the disability.
I agree with Madam Vishwesh and Samindara that acts can be transacted only when there is awareness, and a massive awareness campaign about people with differences, people who have mental illness, people who have temporary mental illness also, as ma'am said, massive awareness. So a lot of education should be under the tree, in the villages, in the communities, and let's keep our institute as a fulcrum and as one of the most powerful forces to influence the community. So a lot of things under the tree and outside, and a lot of students should do research activities during their course, not inside the institute, but even outside. I think that meeting India is the most. Indians should meet India, and that's, I think, the most powerful feeling I have. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's what I believe.
Thank you.
Point is well taken. Samindara ma'am, what is your take?
I'll just conclude by reiterating it's about education, awareness, and advocacy. Each of us as humans, as individuals, as family members, and as professionals, we work on these three pillars, and that would be the first baby steps that we take to bring about this revolution.
Thank you. The point well taken, that the baby steps ultimately become the giant steps for any movement. Like yesterday I said that any movement, it is more like a snowball. The first it has to trigger off, ultimately it becomes the snowball, as we see. Dr. Vishwesh, what would be your take? We have the insights from them under the mental law. What do you say, that how do you look forward? What are the challenges and what are the ways to sensitize in the Disability Act, Disability Law?
There are two things. The first thing I would like to say is every individual has to change their own attitudes towards disability. That is the first thing. The attitudinal change has been called for by none other than the Supreme Court itself. That is where all of us have to begin. We have to change our own attitudes. And the second thing is, I think every one of us, although we may not be disabled, or we may not be covered under the Act, or we may not be recipients of the Mental Health Care Act, I think it is our duty to at least look at these acts. The shorter non-legal versions are available on the web in various sources. I think every one of us should make an effort to at least get a basic idea of what these legislations are about. These two things will go a far way to improve the situation for persons with disabilities and persons who have mental illnesses and other related problems. These two things are very essential.
Thank you, Dr. Vishwesh. Your perspective that if you don't have an idea to move forward, the thought process would be just like a flat tire. The intent is to go, but that machine will not move because the flat tire will not allow you to move.
Yes.
We have Dr. Shashi.
See, I think Wi-Fi was an issue, most probably. Wi-Fi. I think.
Your points you can always trigger off at any point of time. Since we had asked ma'am, I will just try to connect with her. Again, what are this like? Off late, there's a lot of discussion on this thing. Suicide, what is the mental strength to make for the society? Just two wrap up points: how to strengthen the body, how to identify, because it's also one point well taken of the last week episode is that his friends or relatives could not imagine that this thing could be have done. Let's assume we are sensitized or we could identify. I will say that since you are one of the pioneers into this, how do you identify certain symptoms in that? Because they say for attempting to suicide there is a punishment, but once you are successful you cannot be punished.
No, I think IPC 309 has been repealed in the Mental Health Care Act, and it has
124, section 124
has been decriminalized. The special act.
Section 124.
The special act overrides the other act, IPC. So you are not punished at all, even if you attempt, unless there is any evidence of abetment, unless there's any evidence of torture. So section 309, sir, IPC.
So, section 309, but repealed under section 124
yes,
under the Mental Act itself, which says that
yeah, so it's decriminalized. It's decriminalized. Only
yes, it has decriminalized.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So I think I would wait for Madam Gurupur. But the point is, the President of India 2.5 years back said India is in the middle of a looming mental health epidemic. Let's accept that. Why it is happening? There are so many sociological reasons which we cannot revert, which we cannot bring it back. So what is very important is when we have a smallpox epidemic, we fought against it by a vaccine. When we have a COVID epidemic, we are trying to discover a vaccine. We have almost removed oral polio from India, but that may not be true for mental health. But we need concentrated activity across the country, identifying suicidal behavior. Any change in behavior, you should have mental health screening. Any change in behavior, and when there is awareness, there is overdiagnosis, which is very good. So if somebody is talking about death and dying, somebody is very agitated, angry. Somebody says, I want to run away from the house. Somebody says, I want to do a will immediately now. Somebody says, goes and meets everybody and says bye sometimes. Somebody says, I want to go to God. Somebody says that, what is the point in living? My son is doing well. My daughter is doing well. It's good to go. There are so many suicide statements which people do say, but any change in behavior and any one expression of suicidal thought, you should screen. And that is important. No pravachan at all. Don't say everything is good. Why are you committing? Why are you thinking about suicide? No. Any pain in the chest, you go to a cardiologist. So let's respect the brain and as much as we respect the heart, stomach, spleen, or liver. That I think would be the most important sharing. Is that okay if I leave, sir?
So it's fine. I had a talk with ma'am. Somehow there was a power failure. She's trying to connect since they have started with the generator.
I am very happy, Mr. Vishwesh. Now, Hokteni Vattu. Are you all right?
Sorry?
I'm leaving as of now. So,
Namaste, sir. Thank you very much. It has been a pleasure.
Thank you. I just spoke in Kannada, assuming that you know Kannada. So, but
Guttu sir, Kannada Guttu.
But now Ivattu Hoktene now. Thank you, sir. Very nice.
Sir, namaskar.
Namaskar. Samindara, fantastic as always. We are colleagues. Me and Samindara, we work together also. And thank you for being there, Samindara. Because I am so happy.
Thank you for all your insights. As usual, they are spot on.
Thank you.
We do not require here and there anything, because
Thank
once you speak, it actually shows your insights.
Thank you.
So only one thing, one has a question, if you could do, please explain the link between mental illness and criminality. Ma'am has joined us.
Samindara will answer that, if you don't mind. Madam, I
Thank you.
have to leave. Madam, please excuse me.
We are unmuting, ma'am.
So thank you for being with us.
Thank you. And that question of 66% with the WHO and the property thing, I'll come back to you, ma'am. Thank you.
Yeah, please do. Yeah.
So
Thank
you can share it with me. We can connect it. Thank you, sir. Yes, Samindra ma'am. As doctor said, could you explain the link between mental illness and criminality?
To begin with, mental illness per se, having a mental illness does not necessarily make you more prone to criminal tendencies. So I would say the percentage of criminal tendencies in mentally ill population would be roughly the same as that you would see in the so-called mentally healthy population. But yes, there are a few mental illnesses or a few conditions that are more susceptible to these kind of tendencies, which are specifically personality disorders like an antisocial personality disorder, for instance, which in popular terminology we call as psychopaths or sociopaths, right? These are people who have a personality disorder where they feel no hesitation or no qualms about breaking laws, breaking rules, about planning things in cold blood. They basically lack empathy, they lack sensitivity and other human emotions, which results in their engaging in these criminal acts. The other is at times people who may be suffering from severe psychosis. So like a condition like schizophrenia or delusional disorder, where they have a complete break with reality, where they may feel that they are hearing voices or somebody is trying to come to kill them or somebody is telling them that you need to kill this person. That is when, driven by those hallucinations or driven by those delusions, they may engage in criminal acts. But these are so few exceptions or few conditions in which people with mental illness can engage in criminal activities. But per se, there is no, we wouldn't say that there is an over-representation of criminal tendencies in the mentally ill. It would be roughly the same as with the general population. I hope that clarifies.
No, definitely. That's why they say if you want to have any clarification, it's always better to have from the best of the experts. And your informations were spot on, including from Dr. Vishwesh. And thank you, the participants who have joined us, as well as our partner. I will request the knowledge partner, the Symbiosis Law School Pune, on behalf of being a partner, I would request her that to give the insights of the session of 27. And thank everyone, those who have participated on the platform as well as on the Facebook. Thank you, ma'am, and
Thank you so much.
everyone stay
It was a
blessed
pleasure.
and stay safe. Over
Thank
to you,
you.
Dr. Shashi.
Yeah, thank you, Vikas and Dr. Shetty in absentia, Ms. Samindra, for her wonderful insight on the most vulnerable among these, the children, and to Professor Vishwesh for his extensive research insights in a very precise manner which he brought. I have had the privilege of understanding better dimensions than I came prepared with for this, and also this audience, very enlightened audience, especially the advocate who asked the question and another advocate who gave the name of this Citizenship Act, full name of the Citizenship Act. Winding up, I would like to say that the way forward would be extensive legal literacy, the rights of these people who come under both these legislations, People with Disabilities Act and also rights of the people for mental health care, that if they have mental health issue, they have a right to avail.
I think not from our side. Okay, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. I had a talk with Professor Shashi. Again, that issue of electricity is there. But as they say that these are the challenges, not only what we had discussed on the disability law and the mental law. There are always challenges in life. That's what we have tried to learn from all this. The way that sometimes the electricity could go, the ways we can be disconnected, but that spirit to reconnect again is the spirit to join back. I, on behalf of Beyond Law CLC and Symbiosis Law School Pune, thank everyone who were participants. Everyone stay healthy, stay safe. And in absentia, as we said, a special thank you to Professor Shashikala Gurupur, Dr. Harish Shetty, Samindara Sawant, and Dr. Vishwesh. The session had appointed discussions, and there are large number of lessons to be taken forward. And we are quite sacrosanct that those who have been here would take the cues, what you have done, that we have to go deeper into the society for educating people. Accessibility of the law, disseminating of the knowledge is quite essential. Everyone stay safe, stay blessed. Thank you. Right.
Bye-bye.